Well, good evening, Glue Troopers, and some of you have already noticed probably that behind me my stash of boxes of completed kits looks much smaller now, and I even have some models on the shelf. I just put those up real quick for display purposes for this video. I had talked earlier about what I was going to do with all my boxes. You guys sent me a bunch of great ideas, and I actually used a combination of them. Some of these are numerous boxes inside the whole Russian nesting doll thing. I think my record on one of them was I managed to get 5 in one, although I'm not sure which one it was. I'm sure it's one of the bigger boxes. Others may just hold one other. One or two of them are probably just the box themselves. I just couldn't find a place for some oddballs. But overall, also a bunch of them I did fold up because they either didn't have bottoms to them or like the big 16-inch Polar Lights Godzilla. I had to fold it up. It was just so big. It ate up so much space. Even if I put boxes in it, it was better off. And it was actually set up, even though it was heavy cardboard, that it folded very easily. So I've got it clamped down under here, nicely preserved. So every box you saw up there before is right here in about 40% of the space it was eating up before. Now I've got some shelf space available, so I can, which I'm in short supply of. The boxes on this shelf and the things on this shelf are part of works in progress, except for the HO railroad track, the flex track. It's left over from model railroad days. I save it in case it comes in handy for something. But anyway, so I've realized I'm not just going to come in here in the TARBIS and gut it and clean it. That is not going to happen, not without a work crew. So what I'm doing is I'm just going to do little bits at a time, do it in phases over the however long it takes. There's no schedule. So you guys will probably see the changes over time. Now, by the way, it also frees up a little wall space. I might put a few box tops up there. Some of you guys had recommended, and you may notice that perhaps I'm a little bit better lit than before, maybe even a little more in focus. The reason the footage is usually just a hint on the grainy side here in the TARBIS is because all I have is the overhead fluorescence and that little shop light, which is up there now. But somebody had recommended, and I apologize when you send me a suggestion and I do it, I forget who it was. So whoever it was that recommended the LED bulb, that's what I've got, and have to agree. In fact, let me show you a picture I took side by side. Now I had 3 bulbs. This curly Q bulb, the little CFL, was the one I had been using. Then I tried what I thought was an LED bulb. Turns out it was just one of the new style incandescent bulbs. It gave a little bit brighter light and a narrower beam. At least I think it's an incandescent bulb. It wasn't LED because it sure got hot. And then this one is the LED. And of course you were right. The LED blows them away, and it's providing much better light that I can actually just hang it up there when I shoot the video and use it as a studio light. Now I almost brought in one of my studio lights. You guys probably know I have a green screen in my garage and big studio lights, but there's just no room for them in here. If I did, I'd have beautiful crystal clear footage. Well, you saw some of it when I did the diorama. I was using 1 or 2 of them. But anyway, so thanks for that. And also, I took your advice on tools. Everybody said the same thing. Good sprue cutter, good sprue cutter. So my wife asked me what I wanted for Valentine's Day. So I was going to get one of the God Hands, but the things were $55, $60. And everybody said the Tamiya ones are great and they're half the price. So I sent her a link to a Tamiya one, so maybe I'll have that on Valentine's Day. So anyway, now to the Wedell-Williams racer that I'm working on. And oh, by the way, before I get there, I did start working on that little Glencoe car. This is a 51 LeBaron concept car, and when I looked at it in the instructions, like, I don't remember a car ever looking like that, so I went and looked it up. And of course, as we all know, often when you start working on a model, especially it's something you're not familiar with, then you know, God bless the internet, you go and look it up, and it expands your knowledge. It's just like, well, when someone sent me those kaiju recently, I really didn't know anything about. I'd seen Pagila and Gaios at some point, totally forgotten about, but now that I've read a couple of fandom pages on them, like, oh well, now I'm kind of up to speed on them. And that's my alarm to take out the recycle, but that's every other Friday, so that's for next week. Anyway, you know what? I'm not even going to edit that out. I'm just going to leave it in. Anyway, I learned about the 51 Chrysler. What was LeSabre? LeSabre, yes. I keep wanting to say LeBaron. And it's a wild looking car. I wonder if that's an Exner design. Anyway, somebody just brought him up recently, and I had learned about him recently when I did the I believe it's when I did the Tom Daniel video. But at some point, model building just expands your knowledge. You know, it's just wonderful that way. It's so great. So, and speaking of expanding your knowledge, I will entertain you with some more knowledge, building on what I said last night about the Waddell-Williams racer. Now, I shot some video earlier today that I'm going to play here because, man, I made just the worst rookie mistake. And since I can't bear to look you in the face and say it, I'm just going to hand it off to earlier in the day, Max. I was working on the little supermarine race plane, and I had told myself, you know, I built these kind of kits before. I took a quick look at the instructions, which were just an exploded diagram. In fact, here is the instruction sheet to the supermarine. And, you know, that's pretty much it. And I figured, well, this is no big deal. Well, I started getting ready to put the floats on the airplane, and it didn't seem to want to fit. And of course, Hawk did put text instructions up here, but being an experienced model builder and seeing the diorama or the exploded diagram, I'm like, you know, I got it. I got this licked. I don't need to read no stinking instructions. And I even looked at the two triangles that made up the mounts for the floats, and they looked identical, but it turns out they're not, because right there on number 6 in big bold letters, assemble pontoon struts and notches on side. Place the strut with the longest bar across the top in the rear. And I missed that. Sure enough, I had them on backwards. So I wound up having to use some solvent to get them out, but being fragile plastic, even using solvent to loosen the glue, yes, I broke them. I made a real pig's breakfast out of the simplest model you could build. So I've got it over there being fixed right now. I've got, you know, reconstructing it all, and it'll be fine. And again, it was just a casual build for fun, but it got out of hand because of operator headspace and timing. Now, with that little faux pas in mind, this has text instructions. Oh, by the way, it also has some very beautiful diagrams where all the rigging goes and where all the decals go for the different, there's 3 different airplanes you can make. And of course, there's a front view with all the rigging. And it has all kinds of history of the airplane and on the build. And under general information, it says in very small print, but very important in light of what I just said. General information. This kit should be approached with patience and care. It is not intended for the rank beginner or instant gratification model assembler, i.e., this is a project, and I will approach it as such. So it goes on, other information here, but unlike the other one, because I don't have to read no stinking instructions, you can bet I will read this like a Bible before I put the first piece of glue on anything or take the first sprue piece of plastic off of the parts tree. So, live and learn, right? Or I should say in this case, live and relearn. And if you look at it, just really looks like a very well thought out model. So, enough said on that. I hangeth my head in shame. I mean, really, I don't need to read no stinking instructions. I know what I'm doing. Ooh, look, I got it in backwards. There's freaking 15 parts to this airplane. Oh my gosh. I looked at them and I was like, oh, they look the same. And they weren't, because blonde. Anyway, so the good news is the airplane is in the process of being repaired. And oh no, it's not. My God, that thing. Hold on just a second. Just let it run. Everything was perfectly straight when I left. Okay, not a big deal. It just slipped off. I hadn't actually glued that into place, but everything was perfectly in place when I left. And one of the floats slipped off. So hang on, let me fix this real quick. I'll be right back with you. Hello. Yes, is this yesterday? Yeah, this is Captain Max's Models. yeah, I would like to take back everything I said about the little basic Hawk kit being just an easy, fun build, no problems, no fuss. Yeah, yeah. No? Time only goes one way, huh? Okay, thanks. Yeah, you too. Gotta go. Bye. Well, anyway, I'm sort of got that being fixed, but I have a theory. This simple kit is slowly turning into an embarrassment. A true train wreck, if you will. You know, when that first happened, I seriously considered, because one of those things flipped over and crashed, I seriously considered making a crash scene out of it. I was like, no, that's a cop-out. Fix it. But one thing I've learned, and as they say, you know, you always could tell when a pilot's about to tell a yarn, because it either starts off with "there I was" or "this ain't no." So one thing I've learned over time is when we go to take check rides, especially when we're training on a new airplane, but when we're doing our training, a lot of times you'll have just a horrible sim session. Can't do anything right. You walk out of thinking, man, I'm not sure I can do it. You know what happened? And the next one, which is usually often the check ride, it all goes like clockwork. You might have a night full of anxiety the night before, but everything goes okay, and it just sort of gels. And what I've learned is, you know, the Great Material River is generous, but it demands balance. So I'll take this simple kit, shoot my big mouth off about it, embarrass myself, and then when I do the next one, the Williams, which is a very complex, well, you know, it has all this detail and stuff in it. Watch, I'll wager you dollars to donuts, it comes out looking good. And I'll take that trade. I guess there are plenty of folks out there who consistently make good models. I don't. I'm kind of hit and miss. Well, you guys have seen my work, so. But that brings me back to what I want to talk about, the Wedell-Williams. Now, I talked about it last night, the Waddell-Williams 44. And of course, the kit is made to make 121, which was Roscoe Turner's airplane. Now, what was interesting about this is that the instruction sheet, which I talked about in the previous section you just saw, I went in the house and I read this thing. And it's not a how to build the airplane. They clearly expect you already know how to do that. It does tell you stuff that you don't get in most instructions, like this airplane needs to be washed with soap and water, so it'll paint will adhere. And a lot of the things we're used to, you know, I guess that's the older style pressings they use. But he gets into the sub-assemblies, the differences between the different versions. You see, there are only 4 of these things made. One crashed on its second flight. And no 2 of them were identical. And it gets in, all of this text is getting into the differences. It specifically says this model as it comes out of the box is the 1932 version that Roscoe Turner flew in the Gilmore markings. However, Turner, as you may recall, was changing engines as all of these guys were, different cowlings and things like that. And it talks about in here all the detail changes you have to make if you want to make different ones. And it gets, you know, make sure to use photo references, because it even talks about how there's a lot of bad information in books and diagrams that's wrong. The level of detail they get into, number 121 for this year, number 44 for that, and number 92 for this year. It gets into the rigging and everything. And if you'll notice, the landing gear on one side is different than the other. And I'll probably just take a picture and put it up there. And it says if you're making, apparently number 92 had a straight gear, and number 121 and number 44, the gears bowed out. And it points that out here. And I was like, wow. I'd heard that, and he gives the racing stats on it and everything. And I had heard that Williams was just really incredible with the detail, and the amount of research that went into this is incredible. This whole bottom corner of the paper is nothing but all the people that gave him material to get it right, and some of them are from the Air and Space Museum, some of them are from the families of the pilots and the designers. I mean, this is commitment of the highest order. I hope all the parts go together well, but if what I've heard about a Williams kit's true, they will. But I want to get all this read before I got to working on the model. And if I have time tomorrow, I'll come out here, get it washed, get it cleaned up, and get everything set up for the construction. I've got the desk sort of cleaned off. But of course, not to harp on it again, but a lot of things going on. So no promises, but I am looking forward to this. And I did put together a couple of slides real quick. Apparently, in 29, Jimmy Waddell, who is an aviator and a race pilot, teams up with Williams, who's a millionaire, and they start a flying business. And he talks about, we need to make a race plane. Well, they made a couple of smaller race planes that had some, like Wee-Will, which is short for Waddell-Williams, and the Wee-Wink and the Wee-Will Jr. And I don't know if they ever finished the Wee-Wink, but anyway, they were inline engine airplanes, pretty small, and they were evolutions. Well, they weren't getting the kind of performance they wanted, so they made went bigger engines and everything, and that's how what became the 44 got started. And again, they only made 4 of them. Well, remember I told you about they'd had some quality control issues because that wing separated, and that Turner went down to watch them. Well, this instruction sheet again has a very detailed history of the airplane, and apparently what had happened was when Roscoe Turner said, "Hey, can you make me one of those?" Williams was like, "Sure." But he was working on a lot of other projects. So Turner sent his own mechanic down there, and the airplane was built not off of any plan so much as somebody had pointed out in the comment section before, it's basically built on the hangar floor. He was basically taking measurements right off the original airplane. The mechanic's name was Don Young. He was Turner's mechanic. And of course, the other people that were helping, but he was the driver. And I'd heard comments that the welds there were not that great, and I've heard some other things about it. Again, building on the hangar floors. It's basically a home-built airplane. And the airplane actually passed its first flying test fine. But Williams, the investor, didn't want Turner to take it. Apparently, Jimmy Waddell weighed a lot less than Roscoe Turner. And these airplanes aren't that big. If you ever see one, they're pretty tight. He said, "Look, I want you to go up and do a test flight, but I want to add some weight to the airplane, get you up to the weights that Turner will be flying at, including his body weight, full fuel, and all that stuff." So they loaded the plane up, and that's when he was doing the pass, and the wings separated. He barely got out of that thing. He did bail out. The plane, of course, was destroyed. So that's when they decided maybe they needed to bring in an aeronautical engineer to overlook things and see what they were doing. And so they brought in Howard Barlow, who was an aeronautical engineer. And Barlow redesigned the wing, and it was aerodynamically superior, and it was stronger. They added some strength to the airplane, and no more problems. The vibrations went away, and they only built. They did change the wings on all of the airplanes. So the original, what would be number 3 and number 4, all had the new wing. Number 2, of course, it crashed. So that's it. Now, one of these airplanes still exists, and a couple of replicas in museums. Unfortunately, and the more I read about this, I was like, my God, talk about tragedy. Every principal in the Wedell-Williams operation was killed in a plane crash. As I said last night, Jimmy Waddell was killed doing aerobatics in a gypsy moth. Don't really know what happened, but then I believe it said his brother was killed in a plane crash a year or so later, and then Williams, the investor, was just on a routine business trip with a professional pilot in a stagger wing beach, and they crashed on takeoff, and they were both killed. Aviation was dangerous back then. I mean, it still has its foibles, and there's certainly risk involved even to this day. But back then, it was. I don't think it shocks anybody. Back in the 30s, it was far more dangerous than it is today. And I have no idea the details of the crashes. We talked about the Wedell-Williams 44. They actually made one follow-on, the Wedell-Williams 45, which was retractable gear, and it had great potential. But when the principals were killed, everyone said that's it, and they got out of the business. They gave the airplane to a university, and it kind of disappeared. A replica has been made that's on display in a museum. But the reason I think that aviators look up to these guys so much today is because, yeah, there were a lot of fatalities, but and sometimes they should have known better, but most of the times it was just how we learned, what they call tombstone technology. without guys like that, and ones like Jimmy Doolittle who managed to survive, and Turner who managed to survive, but without all these guys, we never gotten to where we're at. And then we wouldn't have all these cool models to build. Anyway, I just thought you guys might find that a little bit interesting. And I always found the Waddell-Williams one of the more normal looking of the racing planes. But the more I look at it with those gigantic engines and that slender fuselage, and I realize it isn't as far off from a GB as you would think. I mean, you're talking about airplanes going 300 miles an hour with wire strut bracing. But then again, that's how we learned, right? So a salute to all those who did that then so we can do what we do now in safety. And I was joking with a first officer a while back. We're cruising across the Caribbean. Of course, we've got all of our electronic wizardry, you know, the moving map and the weather radar and the GPS. I mean, we know down to the millimeter where we're at, how fast we're going, what our fuel consumption is, what it'll be when we get there, what the weather. Yeah, we have so much information available to us. And we sort of sit back kind of smugly, yeah, how those guys, you know, they must not have known what they're doing. How could they possibly have a problem? And I'm like, wait a minute. Let's turn all the lights off the cockpit and just stare out the window at the nothingness, and then take a flashlight and look at one standby instrument and try to fly all the way to Puerto Rico that way with just a wet compass and a, you know, airspeed and attitude indicator. It's like, oh yeah. Yeah. When you don't have that information, all of a sudden it gets to be a real interesting affair. When I was a student pilot, we're going back to the 70s, I'm puttering away on my little Piper Tomahawk at night over the Apalachicola State Forest, which is of course completely dark because there's nothing out there but trees. And my instructor made me hang my flashlight around my neck and everything, with the mighty little, you know, 4-cylinder banging away out there. Not completely oblivious to the fact that if there's even the most minor problem with that engine in this thing, we're going in the trees. And he reaches over and cranks off all the cockpit lights. He goes, it's just black inside. He goes, now what are you going to do? So I reached over and I cranked them back up. He's like, no. He turns them off. Use your flashlight. Had the red lens flashlight. And there's no point in checking the map because there's nothing down there. And I'm like, and all of a sudden, I'm like, wow. Ooh, okay. Not so cool. But the night it really hit me, I was standing on the edge of the Great Lakes at night. And it was a blustery winter, you know, not really wintry, I guess, fall night in the Chicago area. And I'm looking out over the lake, and all you just see is darkness out there. You hear the waves crashing, and I'm thinking, man, to take one of these, you know, in the 1920s, 1930s, plane like Lindbergh flew, just to go across the Great Lakes would be, and it's kind of sunk in just how dangerous it was back then. And I was like, man, those guys were brave, and the ones like Lindbergh and Doolittle and Turner that survived did so because they were careful. And but that's what the gravity thing really sunk in, and that's when I really started to respect these guys. So, enough of that. Well, guys, I hope you're having a wonderful evening, and we will talk at you later. Model on.